Hi guys, it's Marc Zicree, Mr. Sci-fi, also known as Marc Zicree of Space Command. And I'm here with Elaine in London, having meetings with Netflix on Space Command and meetings with the BBC and many, many other exciting, exciting things happening that I'll tell you about soon, including the feature we're doing with Lord Peter Hain, who's a member of Parliament here. Very fun stuff. And but I just watched the little small short Star Trek Discovery pieces that were sort of interstitials prior to the season 2 premiere that I'll be watching tomorrow. And I just wanted to comment on it because I thought it was very, very interesting. As many of you know, they fired the showrunner of the showrunners of the first season of Star Trek Discovery, and I posted commentaries about Discovery, and I thought it was a very hit and miss show. I thought it was kind of like, well, what's the point of that season? What are they trying to say? Of course, I love Doug Jones because Doug is in Space Command as well. He's a dear friend and a wonderful person and a wonderful actor. But the second season, they brought Alex Kurtzman back. He co-created the show with Brian Fuller, and they said that they were going to have the show be lighter, have more humor in it, and just be more upbeat. And additionally, of course, the end of the first season, they showed that it was going to be the second season was going to be an adventure involving Captain Pike and the Enterprise and the younger version of Spock. Because in the first Star Trek pilot, the original Star Trek, they established Captain Pike, who back then was played by Jeffrey Hunter, and Spock was on that ship ostensibly before he was on the Enterprise with Kirk. There's a 2-part episode of the original Star Trek called The Menagerie where they repurposed the first pilot because the first pilot of Star Trek with Jeffrey Hunter didn't sell, and then a second pilot was ordered, and William Shatner played the role of Kirk, and that sold the show, and the rest is history. But so now we come all of these decades later to Star Trek Discovery, and so these 4 shorts, it was very interesting to watch them. I think this sort of tradition kind of started with Battlestar Galactica, Ron Moore's Battlestar Galactica, and where they had shorter stories that kind of linked to the larger series, full-hour episodes. And part of that would be, what they would do is they were used for internet content and basically a way of getting a larger audience to watch, but also they were done on a smaller scale, so they would use the sets, the standing sets, but they might have only a few actors. It might be in just 1 or 2 rooms, and this is very much what they're doing with short treks. And but I really rather liked them, and they're a variable quality, but I recommend that you watch them. The first one is Runaway. It's an episode that focuses on Tilly, and there's an alien stowaway on the Discovery, and it's a kind of a nice piece because these are smaller stories. They run about 18 minutes each. They're focusing on one character at a time, and as a result, they have a little more intimacy, a little more breadth, and so they're rather fun. And so Tilly interacts with an alien who's been injured and so forth. And it was kind of a nice little piece, not consequential, but entertaining. And the second one was really intriguing. And it was an episode called Calypso, and it featured the computer voice. And for some reason, the Discovery had been left a derelict, basically, for 1,000 years. And it's been ordered to stay in that same position and await the return of the crew. And an injured man in an injured ship is taken in by Discovery, and the man is brought back to health. And it was a really interesting piece and really resonant and rather poignant, and a love story between this computer that's been alone for 1,000 years and this man. And one of the things that made it great was it was written by Michael Chabon, who's a major, major novelist, and he wrote The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, which is a very renowned book, and he also won the Hugo for Best Novel for a book that I really love called The Yiddish Policeman's Union, which is an alternate history novel, science fiction, in which the Jews, instead of settling in Israel after the war, are basically given safe haven during World War II and prior to World War II in Alaska. And it's decades later now when they finally have to leave. And it's a murder mystery, and I really liked it a lot. It was really, really great. And so Michael Chabon is a very talented writer, and I believe he's coming aboard Star Trek on Discovery's second season. But he wrote this piece, and it's interesting because it doesn't have any of our regular characters other than the computer, and it was this poignant love story. It's got Fred Astaire and Audrey Hepburn in it, and it's just Really interesting. I really liked it. It was my favorite of the four, and very, and the lighting was darker, and it takes place again only in sick bay and the bridge of the Discovery, and I think one other room, probably the mess, the officer's mess, and but it was good. I really liked it. Now, Brightest Star, of course, the third one stars Doug Jones as Saru, and it's his backstory, it's his origin story, it's how he ended up on Discovery, and it was narrated by him, and I liked it. I thought it was well done, and again, it's setting up a different storyline. We haven't seen his home planet before this, and it sets up his sister and his father. Really, really interesting, and Doug, of course, is a wonderful actor, and I think he's sort of become the favorite, at least one of, if not the major favorite character of the show, and justifiably. And then the final one was The Escape Artist, which was a Harry Mudd story. And and some people have been mentioning that there's certain things that sort of seem to defy Star Trek canon, and that's been an ongoing problem with Star Trek Discovery. And for instance, in Runaway, Tilly is able to beam this alien back to her home planet. Well, that's a technology that they didn't have in the original show. And then in JJ's films, they have sort of this transwarp capability, but again, that's another timeline. And so it starts to play kind of funky with this whole thing, and yeah, it's a little nuts. But The Escape Artist has an even further problem, which is that it has Harry Mudd and it has android duplicates, and yet in the android duplicates weren't until Mudd became the ruler. The first episode that introduced Harry Mudd, who was played by Roger C. Carmel in the original Star Trek, was Mudd's Women, which was a much more serious story about women who take a drug to become beautiful, and Harry Mudd, who is essentially their procurer. But Roger C. Carmel was great, and the character of Harry Mudd was great, so they brought him back. And they brought him back in an episode, the second season episode, I, Mudd, where he finds a planet of androids and becomes their ruler. And there are thousands and thousands, if not millions, of android duplicates. And then there was an animated Star Trek episode called, I can't remember the title, but it was the third Harry Mudd story with Roger Carmel doing the voice. So now they've brought the character of Harry Mudd to Star Trek Discovery, and they have Rainn Wilson playing him. And it's just a darker character, more homicidal character. And he doesn't have charm. The thing about Harry Mudd that I really loved was he had charm, and this character doesn't. And so some people may like this character, this iteration of Harry Mudd. I don't. And so this is The Escape Artist, and it was Harry Mudd being taken prisoner and trying to weasel his way out of it before he's turned over to the Federation. And it was it was okay-ish, but I find Harry Mudd a kind of a problematical character, and it was Rainn Wilson played Harry Mudd, and he also directed the episodes. So, but all of these are very interesting, just from the fact that they're expanding the purview of the show. They're going in a different direction, and one of the weaknesses of modern television, if you're doing an arc where it's one story for the entire season, is you are reliant on that story being wonderful, and if it's not, then you've basically blown a year. And whereas if it's a standalone, like they're doing with the Orville, if it's a standalone, you can have one episode and maybe it's weaker, you'll have another episode that's stronger, but the continuity of the characters remains. And clearly, with doing these shorts, Star Trek is trying to do standalones, and they work. They really work. And now they're talking about many offshoot series. They're developing a Giorgio series with Michelle Yeoh, and they're also developing a Picard series with Patrick Stewart. We'll see how those are. Star Trek is durable, and I think it will continue on into the future. Meantime, we've just released the first hour of Space Command on Mr. Sci-Fi. So if you haven't subscribed to Mr. Sci-Fi, you can. You can watch the first hour, the work in progress. You can watch trailers for 5 more hours. Because I basically feel that Space Command is sort of the third commentary, or the third conversation with Orville and Star Trek Discovery and Space Command. Because Space Command, again, I'm working very much in that mode of a hopeful vision of the future. It's not as dark as Star Trek Discovery. It's not as vulgar and light as the Orville, though I like the Orville in many ways. I also like Star Trek Discovery for all of its flaws. I think these are both shows where people are really trying their best. They're really trying to create something memorable. The second season of Star Trek Discovery clearly is going to be very different. It's going to be the search for Spock. Now, whether or not that will be resonant, whether or not that will work, they already did the search for Spock in the third movie. The challenge with any show is to say something meaningful about life. And the original Star Trek did that to a grand degree. and Star Trek: The Next Generation did it, and Deep Space Nine did it. It was wonderful to come up with stories for those shows and really change the canon, but also more than that, say something very meaningful about our world. If you watch Far Beyond the Stars on Deep Space Nine now, it's even more relevant with the Black Lives Matter movement and so forth than it was when we did it back in the 1990s. So I'm very proud of Star Trek, and I think every time, every new Star Trek series, every new iteration of Star Trek, there's a chance to do something deeply meaningful. And so I'm still rooting for Star Trek, and I'm still doing my own version of that kind of a show with many of the Star Trek fraternity. So as many of you know, in Space Command, we've got Robert Picardo, we've got Doug Jones, we're going to be having Armin Shimmerman, we're going to be having Ethan Phillips, and on and on and on, just many of the Star Trek actors, and as well as actors from Farscape like Gigi Edgley, and actors from Babylon 5 like Mira Furlan and Bill Mumy and Bruce Boxleitner. It's great fun to work with these actors and to work in this genre. And so I just wanted to touch base about the Star Trek shorts. I think it's great. I think, the more the better. And so I'll be watching the premiere here in London probably tomorrow and post about it. And we'll see where we go from there. But meantime, we're pitching Space Command to Netflix. We're having many meetings, and we'll see what happens. We'll know soon where things go. But meanwhile, we're laying out the entire first season of Space Command even further than we have, and it's going to be quite amazing. And we're going to shoot the next few months regardless of what happens with these meetings, because we are committed to this project, and we love working with our team, and we love working with you and having you be so supportive. So that's it for now. Marc Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, Marc Zicree of Space Command, Marc Zicree, commentator on Star Trek Discovery, etc. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.